Alright, so in this video we're gonna use Houdini 21's new feature to Lookdev a tree that is imported from SpeedTree. There's a couple new features that will have the chance to use, like the live render in gallery to test out the render. And in terms of materials, we should be able to use the stencil maps that benefit some performance boost when it comes to cutting out geometry via textures. And we'll use the Primvar texture that will allow us to store the different texture exported out of SpeedTree, store them into the geometry and read them on the fly with the material. So we'll see how we can implement those things. If you are interested in knowing more about the features that I look forward to try the most with Houdini 21, I invite you to check out my gumroad. You can subscribe to it if you want to receive a newsletter / blog article that I've been writing for the past few months, at least once, twice a month. I'm trying to release some news, and those are not just about my project, current or upcoming. It's also about different topics that are related to the industry. So in that case, the last one was treating Houdini 21's release and exposing some features that I do find very relevant, at least for environment workflows, and how that could impact, well, the way I work. Yeah, definitely check it out if you're interested. And now, without further ado, let's dive in. I have here a template from SpeedTree that will just export some typical simple mesh that are being detailed through some texture map with these needle clusters. So that's the geometry we want as a stencils. And in the way we're gonna export, that means we're gonna need to combine the geometry per material. So let's do export mesh. I will set things to Alembic because, well, I just prefer Alembic than their USD. I'd rather configure stuff myself. And you know what, we'll leave everything PNG and everything, so let's export that. Conifer 01. Cool, so let's go try that. Alright, so in Houdini we're gonna start creating this tree, and we'll use the component builder for the sake of this exercise. Yeah, so that's something we've used in the previous tutorials, and it's been implemented in Solaris since a while now, so I assume most people are sort of familiar with this setup. But anyway, I will kind of quickly re-explain how this works, and we'll use it to integrate the export we have from SpeedTree. So component geometry is here to deal with the geometry. Material library is about creating the materials, and component material to assign those materials, while the component output is to save the USD in what is called the asset catalog, and well, just write the USD on disk that we can then reference into any scene to create some fun environments. So yeah, let's get started. In the component geometry, that's where we're gonna go ahead and load our Alembic file. If you've been exporting something else, like, I don't know, FBX, you might want to use file. But, well, I took an Alembic, so I'll just grab that one, and I have this broadleaf. I got multiple tree I exported. I'm thinking trying this one is a pretty interesting one. So cool, let's have a look at the default purpose. And right now we see the hierarchy of this one, and we can already see it's pretty convoluted, where we have every geometry grouped by material. So this is great, it's easy to assign stuff, but at the same time we have this null in between the mesh and the root of our mesh, which I don't like. It feels very like Maya. Yikes. So I just want the geo to be named bark and not, and so on. So let's see how we could just do that using some vex. Let's use a primitive wrangle to edit what's called the path attribute. So you'll notice in here we have this path attribute that corresponds to the hierarchy. And what we could do is try to split this one by this / so that we can actually retrieve an array of the different part of this path. The first one being broadleaf, then in that case leaf 1 v4, and then the rest that we can trim. So we'll create a variable called path, so string path equal s at path for calling this string path attribute, and we want to split it. So let's call an attribute, not an attribute, a variable called part, or whatever you want to call that, and we'll put these brackets to indicate that it is an array, and we'll use the split function there, and we want to split this path variable and split it by this /. So the idea here is that we can override this path attribute using these parts. Using this bracket, we can select a specific index, and the advantage of this is that we can extract an item that is stored within an array. So in that case, 0 would mean the first one it finds, which should be broadleaf A. And yeah, I forgot this stuff. So now we have, yeah, broadleaf A. If we take 1, that's the middle part, that was the leaf. And just like that, we can recreate a more simple hierarchy. So hopefully that makes sense. So I will just call / plus parts 0, and let's add an add, so we can recreate a string just like that and get the simplified hierarchy like so. So if I go back to stage, we see now we do have the geometry, the mesh, sorry, that is stored right under the root of broadleaf A. So it does look much nicer. So if you're like me and you OCD about names and hierarchy, you could just do that. And I'm gonna show you another vex trick if you want to merge, let's say, all this leaf 1, this leaf 2 together. Well, you can always do that. I don't necessarily need 4 variation of my leaves, so who cares? The way I'm gonna do that is using some conditional. So let's try something like if we use a find function, and we want to find within path variable. If we find this leaf 2, leaf underscore 1, for example, if we find more than one of these, then let's rename this path attribute to something else, and that's gonna be at path equal this, and we want to call that leaf 1. And let's close this conditional with this curly bracket. Yeah, and I did a mistake. I probably forgot to close a parenthesis. Yeah, and now we have leaf 1, and we can do the same for the leaf 2. So if leaf 2 is in the name, we will call that simply leaf 2. So that's the only tricky thing here, is just setting up the hierarchy. And again, you're not forced to do it. It's, I think, much nicer. And actually, I realize it still creates a bunch of mesh, which I don't like. And the reason is we might need to unpack this as a delayed load primitive for it to work. So yeah, if I try that now, let's see. Yeah, we now have just spark not leaf 1 and leaf 2. Yeah, and as you notice, my viewport was set to preview, which completely disabled the viewing here. So let's actually set up a proxy. What we'll do is how we're gonna do that? We'll do the usual. We'll use a scatter, and scatter some point that will turn into a VDB. So let's set that to manual for now. I don't want to make Houdini too crazy, so I'll set a fairly low density for now, just to be sure that it works. Yeah, so that's a decent amount of points already. Let's increase a little bit. Yeah, okay, cool. Let's do a VDB from polygon. Sorry, VDB from particle. And again, I'm gonna put that to manual, and because I'm not sure about the voxel size I will put something fairly high for now, just so that it's not gonna consume too much memory, and we'll refine if needed. I will increase point radius scale to 10, and yeah, actually that's not bad. So obviously the radius scale can't be lower than the voxel size, otherwise it's not gonna work. But something like that is decent, I guess. And I will VDB smooth that so that it looks a bit less weird, even though it's still gonna look kind of weird, but hey, that's it's just a proxy. Oh yeah, no, maybe not. Yeah, something like that. Maybe we could even make that blobbier to be, just to be sure. Yeah. And let's convert that to a mesh using VDB, convert VDB. And let's set that to polygon. We can increase adaptivity. And you know what? We could probably reduce that some more to get something even more simplified. And the advantage of having this proxy is just for layout, it will make the viewing experience a bit easier. I think if you try to display a very high res mesh, it's usually saturating the viewport into too many polygons, so it can get very slow, or turn everything into boxes, so that's not ideal either. I'd rather see like simplified mesh like that, and that should be enough to represent my tree. So right now we have, if I middle click, 6,000 points, 15,000 primitives, as opposed to, yeah, 2 million. Yeah, that's much lighter. So let's plug that as a proxy, and we could plug that as a guide, sim proxy. Cool. So now in theory, if we jump back in here, we should have final render is the high res, and preview is this shit mesh. Sweet. So this basic mesh will actually be useful if you need to position trees manually somewhere. Yeah, so that's cool. We have our geometries with a nice hierarchy. We have the proxy, which doesn't have a name, but I don't care. You can always specify a better name using a name here. Let's call this one proxy mesh. And we should have proxy mesh now. Yeah, there you go. And I'm happy with that. So, okay, now we're gonna need to apply materials. And, you know, in the past, what we would do would be to create a material per element, like one material for bark, knot, leaf 1, leaf 2. Well, that's a bit time consuming, and also it's not ideal if you wanna, well, do some tweaks to the shaders. And in that case, there's a new feature in Houdini 21 that allows us to store some string primvar within those different mesh and extract it into a shader, which means we can potentially have one master shader that drive the look of all these. So we're gonna do a test. We're gonna create some primvars using an attribute wrangle. And again, some more coding, but don't worry, this should be pretty simple stuff here. We're just gonna create some attribute, like something like a string attribute called base color that will store the base color texture. So we'll create a string controller using CHS function, and what we want is called that base color. So there's a few maps we may want to use through this tutorial, and SpeedTree will have the roughness, the spec roughness. There is the normal that we will need, the SSS amount for the leaf, and there is the SSS color. So we have these 4 SSS. Cool. All we need to do is simply click this to populate these parameters, and we're going to edit parameter interface and turn that into a different type of parameter. We want file image. So yeah, just like so that we can easily load stuff in here. So we're gonna start by run this over primitive. I thought I ran over primitive, but somehow I wasn't. So we want to use these groups maybe to apply, okay, bark. I want to apply my bark texture. So let's go ahead and grab this bark. Yeah, spec roughness. I think we have a glossiness. So in that case, we'll need to account for the fact it's not a roughness, it's a gloss. So we need to invert that. Bark normal, and we say we don't have any SSS for this one, so it's fine. Let's call this texture set 1. Voilà. Donc voilà, let's call it texture set, and then we'll do the same for the cap. Everything's being populated by this attribute spec roughness, and we are storing this path as a string, and we're gonna be able to call that into the shader. So we'll just do a quick test and just try that on the base color. We'll create a comma material builder, and let's call that SP Mat. Wow, such a cool name, SP Mat. Anyway, let's grab an image, like a tiled image. I assume that some texture might need to be tiled, like the bark, so may as well use that one. And we don't need to go grab this file here because it's already stored into the geometry. So what we actually need here is a geometry property uniform value, and we're gonna grab the name base color. That's how we called it, right? So let's get this one, and if we want, we can assign a default color like some purple. So cool. I'll get rid of the displacement, we won't need that, and let's assign that to this broadleaf. And you know what, we'll go ahead and just manually hook that like so. So let's see, I might want to use a light like a comma, physical sky, or if you have an HDR that you like, feel free to use it. We'll just quickly set up something here with yeah, okay, something like that. Sweet. So let's do a quick render, see what we get. Yeah, we see some color, and you know what, it's not half bad. It's actually kind of cool. So just with this shader, we are able to load all those textures. We need obviously to finish the material network, but that's the overall idea here. So kind of cool. We haven't finished, but let me first set up the opacity. So the opacity map now is something that we can use using a render geometry setting. So you'll notice you have in the shading tab this stencil map that allow you to assign a specific opacity to a certain primitive. Let me set this back to OpenGL, and I might just go and pick this leaf one, and we'll apply the corresponding texture to this one. So in my case, it's called spring opacity. And I'll do the same for the set number 2, and grab the leaf too. So in theory, we should have a proper cutout now. And yeah, there we go. So now we should have proper leaf shape as opposed to before. If I turn this off, yeah, we see that's clearly it's a plane. Yeah. So in the past, this kind of things, that's something that you would absolutely need to set up in shader, and that would be much more time consuming. Well, for render, not necessary for setup. What you would do is simply hook up some maps in the geometry opacity there. And it is worth flagging that this workflow is still relevant if you have an opacity map that contains multiple UDIM tiles, as right now it doesn't seem like the stencil map is supporting UDIMs, at least from what I tested in version 21. At this point, if you're interested in exporting your USD, you totally can. I would say potentially as part of this network, I think the render geo might be wiser to put them after the material is being applied, because from my experience that didn't result in a good result, but let's see if we try that. So to export the USD, you will have the component output that's here for that, and that should already set up to export everything nicely for you with all those names nicely defined. You can always middle click to visualize where it's going to export things. But yeah, in my case, I'm happy to call that broadleaf _A, and you see the whole structure is updating. So that's pretty sweet. And it's going to export all these different USDC that store the geo, the payload, material, all that good stuff. So save to disk. And if we are interested in loading that into the asset gallery, that's totally something you can do. Or should I say now asset catalog, that's been renamed. I'm not sure if there's a whole lot new feature. So that's something we can, I guess, figure out as we go. But you can create, if not already done, your own catalog using create new asset database and store it, well, somewhere. In my case, I have this here. And yeah, I'm ready to create a thumbnail. So if you scroll down, you'll see some option for generating thumbnails. Make sure that your camera in the viewport is centered to take the snapshot. And what I usually like to do is actually set to Houdini GL, just to take the current state of the viewport. And if I set it to XPU, and that should be good. So let's do a generate thumbnail and add to asset catalog. And I guess we get something, even though we don't get the light. I guess it's better than nothing. In my experience, render didn't quite work, at least from the test I've been doing. It was not storing any render there. But well, you can always do a custom image if you really want something nice and clean. So that's pretty much it for this YouTube tutorial. On my gumroad, we'll expand on the topic and see what else we could do to improve the Lookdev. Obviously, we haven't finished the material since we are only loading the base color. So we'll see how we can create a proper master shader that we can reuse for most materials. And also we'll create a quick scene where we can instance those trees. So I'll recap the workflow for that. There's nothing new that I have seen in Houdini 21 when it comes to instancer LOP. So I'll show you the workflow I'm using there and how to scatter different variation of this tree. So where can you find this product? It's on my gumroad, as I mentioned. It is actually part of my Houdini Solaris USD environment workflow subscription. You could see that as a Patreon equivalent, where you pay a small fee monthly to access some exclusive content. We start to have quite a bit of content in there, like the Cloudscape sci-fi series, some lighting tips from my Chasm Skull contribution, and also a pre-release of the Cookies and Milk for Renderman series. This one will hit YouTube as a shorter version as soon as I finish the edit, so you can expect this OJ tutorial from Pixar and Harshag Rowell to show up very soon on my channel with some RenderMan Solaris sauce. So that's it for now. As Michael Scott would say, see you on the flippity flop.